talk series of Lokadharmi. Many of the people are almost regulars. We see very familiar faces, but there are a few people who have come for the first time. We'll be getting more people, I know. So just to start, there's no need to introduce Kirti Jain to those people who are assembled here because she's such an important theatre person living in the country right now. But just to the new faces, just give a very brief, very brief thing about Kirti Ji. Kirti Ji is an alumni of National School of Drama, New Delhi, and then to make it fast, she joined as an assistant professor there, was teaching there for a long time, and then she became the director of National School of Drama from 88 to 95. She was the director of National School of Drama, which was a very important period in the history of National School of Drama. I know that many of her students are hearing me right now here, so they know better than me. But in her tenure, she has, as she has been speaking right now, she has introduced that theatre in education kind of thing, the Thai company for School of NSD. Theatre in education, it's her idea, which she started then and which is still continuing and going on very well, working with children's theatre and education, theatre and education, all those things. And she is one person who thought of taking National School of Drama out of the capital of Delhi. And it's at her tenure that there was a regional resource center which started at Bangalore. Now she has that vision of that NSD should not be just limited into the corpus Nikasma or the Delhi only. It has to extend its wings to the other parts of the country. So she came to South India to have this branch here. Now we have, as we said, we have many centers, at least 4 other centers working in different places of the country, which have different courses like in Tripura, Varanasi, Bangalore, and Sikkim. That's about her contribution to theatre academics and theatre teaching and theatre training and her vision of that. Of course, she is a very creative director who has done different kind of productions from classics like Hayabadana, Laharam Ke Rajham, Sashat Ke Ek Din, all these kind of classic text. Plus, she has devised a number of productions, starting from novels, short stories like Sab Kuch, Chakachak, और कितने टुटके, हमारा शहर उस पास, Baghdad burning, all these productions which were very important. She has done productions in different places in NSD, outside India, all those things. She has traveled widely, and she has dealt with classic plays plus new issues like globalization, women's issues, all these things, gender issues, all those things have been coming in her productions. And also she has been doing a lot of work in writing and documenting theatre. She has been writing a wonderful book on Badal Sircar, apology, and she has been the editor of many collected books, and she is the founder director of Natarang Pratishthan, which is documenting what's happening in Indian theatre, one of very unique attempts that's happening. So it's writing, documenting, teaching, creative directing, traveling, doing workshops. As people said, people have experienced her presence in workshops in different places. She has been writing, traveling to UK, Poland, Germany, Italy, Soviet Union, France, Japan, USA, to different parts of the world and seeing what's happening and exchanging what we can give back to the theatre there, all those things. And naturally, she should get a lot of accolades for her work. She has been given the B.V. Karan Smriti Puraskar and the Sangeet Natak Academy Award, etc. So we have a very important person talking to us about a very current topic of devising theatre, and I'm very happy that she is a long time friend of mine, so that I could very easily call her and said, no, please come and talk to us. So I had that liberty with her. Thank you, Kirti, for coming with us, and thank you all. Welcome all. We have very important theatre people. I'm not naming them right now. Hearing you and very young people, people from Lokadharmi. So all of you welcome, and as you know, Kirti will be speaking, and then we have a question and answer session. Let it make it. And another important thing before Kirtiji starts, I have to tell you, please listen this carefully. Next session is not at 11 o'clock as usual. It starts at 1:30. It will be starting at 1:30 because the speaker is talking from Johannesburg. Balwant Thakur is at Johannesburg. He is the Director of the Cultural Affairs of Government of India there in the embassy. So to match his time this morning, we had to shift it from 1:30 to 4. So next week, it's Balwant Thakur speaking on theatre management, which is another important area of doing theatre, which people do not usually think about. And it's a very crucial and important thing. So please note the time. Next week, it's 1:30, not at 11. 1:30, Balwant Thakur speaking on the managing theatre. And after that, we have Ramanjit Kaur. She is also here to hear Kirti Ji. She will be joining us on the next 4th of October. So with this, welcome you all again, and welcome Kirti Ji. It's all to you.
Thank you, Chandradasan, and thanks. I want to thank Lokadharmi for giving me this opportunity. It's wonderful to be able to, in this period of lockdown, to connect with people at least online. And in this case, one can say that we are so long distance that it's probably easier to connect online than to actually meet. So thank you very much. When I was thinking about the subject, I was thinking the direction that my work has taken, which is more and more of devising theatre. But then Chandradasan also told me that it would help if one gave a kind of brief idea or the general conceptual framework of devising theatre. I must say at the outset that that's not my area of expertise. But from what I understand, devising theatre is about, I will give a brief background and then talk about my work. And basically, my work also as an illustration, because I think it brings in some of the issues that devised theatre is around. So that's how I'll try to structure it. I would say that the roots of devised theatre or theatre devising lie in the early, sort of 60s and 70s, when there was a break from the conventional theatre practice, more in the US and the European countries. I would say more there, that there was a break and there was something that was emerging called the post dramatic theatre, where the hegemony of the text was being questioned, where actually theatre as a collective activity was being brought to the forefront. The focus was being shifted from the playwright to the artist, to the performer. And in fact, actually, I think all kinds of things were opened up for questioning. So whether it was the kind of space in which these were being done, it was said at that point that these spaces themselves are very hierarchical. They're also kind of spaces. The conventional theater hall is a space where the audience is put into a passive situation, just you know so the whole exercise promotes just status quo. It does not encourage questioning, and therefore more live interaction between audience and actor was thought about. I mean, people wanted to work in that direction. People started working in that direction. The whole dynamics of a theater space where people are there to share an experience was, sort of put center stage. that it's not as though the performers are going to show something or present a commodity and the others were there to consume it, but that it was something which was a shared space of ideas, of imagination, of creativity. That was the idea which kind of guided that post-dramatic theatre point. It was also questioning the linearity of the narrative. So, so it was kind of opening it up to multiple voices, multiple points of view, multiple perspectives, and therefore also, sort of fracturing the or rupturing the linearity of the narrative. It was trying to do actually a lot of things. It was trying to uh, question the role of the audience. It was trying to question the way representation was happening. It was trying to question this idea of representation itself. So I just think that that was quite an important point where um, the moment you are questioning the hegemony of the text, you are actually saying that I'm not going to work with a play text. I'm going to create my own text, the performance text. And so I think that is where devising begins, and this works through very intense improvisatory processes, and a very different kind of performance comes up. So, uh, uh, sort of people like Richard Schechner or Peter Brook or all these people were working in that direction. I think these initiatives took place in the UK, France, Canada, Australia, US, and all these places. Um, and the whole attempt was that it should be a more participatory experience. So, and I think it was also questioning the economic imperatives of a commercial theatre, the conventional theatre, that it requires a certain kind of expenditure, it requires a certain model where you will attract people, and therefore it did not allow you to take risks. And they believed that theatre was about making yourself vulnerable, questioning, exploring, and therefore not really falling into a kind of pattern which was accepted. So questioning the status quo in all kinds of directions. So then what is devising theatre all about? I would say if one were to make a definition, or if I think it's a work where you don't have a given play text. So it could be that you have a text. It could be that you're devising based on a novel, on an autobiography, on a story, on poetry, on a poem. It could be that you're devising based on research, experience, a newspaper clipping, or whatever. So there is some text, but that is not the text. It can form the backdrop, but you evolve then a whole performance text, which will go much beyond what was being said in the written text. So basically, you're beginning work without a script or without a whole idea of what the design of the production will be. I mean, I remember from my time of training that we were told that not only, of course, that there was no question of devising at that point, at least we didn't know about it, that we were given a text which we had to direct as a director trainee, and we had to sit at home and do the blocking on paper, that this is where the actor will move on this line, this is where he'll stand, this is where he'll look, and this is where his co-actor will be. So the blocking, as we call in theatre, was done in advance by the director, and therefore the director was required to have the picture of the entire production even before he went on the floor. So what will be the costumes, what will be the design, what will be the movement, everything was supposed to be pre-decided. Uh, One can imagine that this is a complete reversal of that, the devised theatre, where you don't know anything except the idea on which you want to work, probably. Largely it will just be the idea. So what devised theatre is I think that idea then is developed through processes of improvisations, experiments, different kinds of creative strategies, and you cannot pin it down to a single methodology. It will be, each person would be working or having a completely different trajectory or a process which he or she will take, or in fact, the same director might take up different strategies for different productions. So the guiding force could be different things, different, sometimes props, sometimes images, sometimes music. It could be just anything, which is the starting point. Um, this sort of this is something which has a greater spontaneity. It allows for greater collaborative work in the true sense, in the sense of while sort of this was also seen as a process which is more democratic and less hierarchical, but in our country, from what I have seen, even when we are directing a play which is a devised play, I think the director has a fairly central position as a decision maker, as a person who controls, who rejects. I would say that the director is like the editor, who first sets the strategy or starts a process or gives an impetus, and then finally edits things which are coming up. So sort of when you're actually devising, you are a mix of an editor, a designer, sort of a catalyst. So you are rehearsing and researching, you're choreographing, you're discussing, you're debating and going back on the space. But uh, what it what it does is that it brings out the sort of brings out the performer, or allows the space to the performer to bring out his own perspective, to bring out his own viewpoint, bring out his own experience in relation to the idea that is being explored. And that is what really makes it more democratic, in my view, and not just democratic, it makes it that much more exciting, because the real meaning of having 10 people work together is when to we get exposed to how they are thinking about the same problem, how they are responding to the same situation. So if you were to give the same exercise to four groups of people or four individuals, you'll see completely different results. And that's the most exciting part of actually this whole process of devising, that not only do you understand the situation in greater complexity, but you also get to understand the people who are presenting that situation, with different points of view. So, I'll come to what I feel about it much slightly later. But this is the exciting part of, and so it gives a greater, because there's no given text, it gives greater freedom to structure the material that the way you want to. It can allow you to change focus midway, sort of, if things emerge like that. You might be proceeding with a given idea, but then something can happen in the rehearsal process which might change that. It allows you to give multiple perspectives, multiple even body languages and the messages that they are giving. So I just feel that sort of devising is really allowing the multiplicity of voices to come in a very, very complex way. And it gives you a new way of seeing things, because the narrative remains more open, more unstable, more disrupted, diffused, I would say. And this then also allows for greater collaboration at different levels. So it's possible that sort of it's not just the director's version that's coming on stage or what he or she wants, but it is the actor's version of that same idea. It could be a designer which is creating a parallel text. It could be a musician who's creating a parallel text along with what the performers are doing. So it allows that multi-layering much more in a much more complex fashion, which makes today's performances sometimes sometimes more difficult to difficult to deconstruct, but probably they also make them more exciting because every time you see a performance you read different things. You have the space for seeing the same thing again and again, and yet finding very different meanings every time you see them. So it becomes much more collaborative as a practice, and it allows for, I would say that this also creates a different kind of aesthetics naturally, because the whole approach is more collaborative. So it creates a different aesthetics, and I'll come to some other things, but definitely what it does is give greater flexibility, a kind of open-endedness. People can come in with personal concerns, people can come in with different political ideologies, people can come in with different aesthetic ideas and languages, and finally, sort of create a whole with all these multiple perspectives. So I personally feel that very broadly, if one were to put that, um, this is where I would say devising is all about. Um, and therefore, anybody writing for a devised play uh, would actually not be projecting his or her idea, but would be really picking from what he's seeing in improvisations, what he's seeing in sort of emerging from a discussion, what he would see in emerging from an image, etc., etc. So it's really putting together different points of view into a script and creating a script which is more like a performance text, not a play text. And this kind of play text would be very similar, I would say, to a film script, just to understand how it's different, where a film script is not something which can be redone by another person. Film script embodies the whole idea of that particular film. So the whole text is the film text, the film text. Similarly, the script so devised for a devised play would be for that performance. It cannot be duplicated, because when it's duplicated, it will just be a copy. Um, so yeah, I mean, and in our country, when I noticed this devising of scripts more concretely in the work of most women directors. Uh, I found that somebody like Anuradha or somebody like Anamika, these are people who were taking different kinds of texts. They were taking, sort of research-based ideas, autobiography, just a story, and so as a body one found that sort of a lot of women directors were working on this, and later on sort of questions in my mind as to why that is the case, and I think that was uh, similar to what how I turned to devising. So I'll now sort of talk about how and why I turned to devising. You see, the one was, of course, that having been trained in the very conventional theater, I was finding that I don't find it exciting enough to direct a play. In fact, I used to feel scared to go into a rehearsal, because I felt that when I'm working with actors, how am I empowered, or how am I supposed to know where that actor should go or would go when he is feeling this emotion, or when he's saying this particular line. And therefore I used to be very shaky in having to even tell them that I want you to go there. It was against my grain. I felt it was dictatorial, and therefore I was very uneasy, I must say, and therefore I failed miserably in my earlier work. It's only as an accident that in a given text-based play, I had to resort to improvisations because I did not get time to prepare uh, the whole paperwork for a production. And that was Leheron Ke Rajhans, when Habib Tanveer was supposed to come and direct it. And 3 days before the rehearsal were to start, I was told that he can't come, and therefore I had to take it on. So therefore, I was familiar with the text, but I hadn't worked on its production script. So I had to start with improvisatory work. I had some very good actors, and therefore it became. And for the first time when I was doing a play, I found it very exciting to be a part of a rehearsal where I was just giving an idea to work on to the actors, and they were coming out with amazing, surprising interpretations of that text. I thought that I understood that text, having taught it for 10 years before that, or even more. But suddenly different meanings were emerging as we were trying to play little units or play little ideas from that text. And that is when, sort of when you went back after the rehearsal, you felt, oh, sort of amazing experience of having discovered so many meanings of that moment, of that relationship, of that word, of that space. And that started making it exciting, and that kind of pushed you into working into greater and greater specificity. And having found that process exciting, it opened up for me an area that I don't need the crutch of a written text. One could work and one could explore much more probably, and much more freely, and much in many more directions if one was not tied down, let's say, to a given text. The text had its own strengths that we were then allowed to play around with it, depart from it, and come back to it with so many other meanings added. Mm, uh, but the possibility of working without it also emerged. So subsequently, um, sort of the once this excitement had started, I really wanted to work on something through which I wanted to say something which would say something to me, and which I would like to share with everybody else. So I think I remember the first play I did after Leheron Ke Rajhans was Subarnalata, which is based on a novel by Asha Purna Devi. And the moment I read the novel, it's about a young woman, a 9-year-old who gets married against her mother's wishes, but the society at that time in Bengal, and her life and her struggle to fight for a little space for herself, a fight for some independence, to be part of, to be able to look out of the window, to want a little veranda, to be able to participate in the freedom movement, to be able to read a book. So it was about her struggle. And I don't know why it's resonated so much with me when I read it, but I think it resonated because I felt that even almost 100 years after that reform movement, the position of women in India is not very different. And also the sheer spiritedness of this woman to fight against the whole establishment was something which moved me very much, and I felt I have to do it. So that was really the beginning. I'll just briefly talk about what, sort of what kind of led me into it. It was, in this case, the script was done prior to the production, prior to the rehearsals, but I shared with the person who wrote the script, Gitanjali Shri, one of our very celebrated Hindi novelists, young novelist who writes in a very uh, new kind of language for Hindi fiction. But I shared with her the images, that predominant images that came to my mind when I was reading the novel. And then she wove those in, because she said that you have to give me the sort of a kind of framework in which to put this huge novel. It's almost like an epic. And for me also, it was very challenging that how do you encapsulate the spirit of that novel into this. I'll also show you some photographs, but sort of the primary image that kept coming to me when I read the play, or how it would begin at least, was that of a little girl uh, who's a child and who plays with dolls even after her marriage. And I imagine that in this joint family, sort of if they have a room to themselves, one small room, what would be her space in that room, which is her personal life, which is her secret life. And I kept feeling that maybe it'll be her dolls and her conversation with dolls. So when I started working, before even the script was written, when I started working with one of the actors I had asked to do Subarnlata, we worked a lot, and I asked her to find a space in that room, probably imaginary room, whatever it would be. What would be that space? And she felt that it might be, sort of she keeps her things hidden under the bed. Mm, and so whenever she's alone, she, or it's behind a curtain. So we chose the idea of the bed. And then I think for about 10 days, we were just working with this whole thing of the dolls and her, partly because there's a huge section of the novel which deals with her recalling her childhood, which deals with her memory of what she was doing, and which deals with what has happened in the first, let's say, 6 7 years of marriage, and from the age of 9 to about 15 16. Now there was no way we could keep enacting every stage, because the play starts from this age when she gets married, the novel, and to the time of her death. So we had to really recreate that time uh, through some imagery. And therefore the entire idea of childhood, a lost childhood, her new relationships in this home, her memory of her mother, her longing for freedom, all that was played out just through a small 5 minute section of her talking, or enactment with her dolls. So I'll just show you photographs, but I'll talk about the next play, which was really a devised play. uh, this one was based on, sort of one of my concerns or questions. I've talked about it quite often, but one of my concerns or surprise, I would say, was this is, in 99 when I thought about it. Mm, I think we were talking about 50 years of Indian independence in 97. And at that point, it struck me that how come such a huge event like the partition, particularly for the northern and the eastern India, where I think many lives went upside down, so many deaths, so many displacements, so much loss, so much trauma, and it had not found expression in theater or film. So by that time, I remember I had seen Garm Hawa, which was about partition, and on television I had seen Tamas, which was about partition. Um, and in theater, I had only seen Jis Lahore Nahi Dekhya. And I was amazed that, sort of after World War II, there is a whole, I mean, even till date, we keep seeing films and plays and everything around the destruction and the trauma and what it did, how it changed perceptions uh, in the lives of people who faced it closely. But in India, we didn't talk about it, and I kept wondering how and why. So, and I was actually searching through a lot of literature, criticism, when I came across Urvashi Butalia's book, which was The Other Side of Silence, which was actually interviews with survivors, real survivors of partition, who had migrated from the Pakistan side to the Indian side, and who she had interviewed. And those interviews really told a lot of stories, and a lot of stories about the silences. that why the silence about this, so it was a whole cultural thing that came up front about how we wanted to be silent about it because we were either party to it and therefore ashamed, or we were not party to it but were silent observers and therefore we were ashamed. Either we were the victims of rape or abuse and therefore we were ashamed, or we were a part of the family of those who were raped or abused and therefore we were silent. So it was amazing how there was this whole, range of reasons for the silence. Mm, and that is when I thought that I will make this the base for my play on partition. So I began with, once I'd got this as the peg, I started collecting more stories, talking to more people who had actually seen partition, met very senior people, but then a huge, you know, mound of material collected. And I got very nervous. How will I select? I mean, what do we really focus on? And it is then that I decided that we'll just focus on the women's interviews in that and select some women's interviews. And within the women's interviews, focus on the idea of two ideas. One, the idea of choice, or how it is said that they had choices, but were they really choices? And second was the idea of honor, how women's bodies become the site of protection, of honor, of families, communities, without their choice. So this whole idea of honor is, sort of the stories which talk, or let's say revealed, this whole notion, false notion or imposed notion of honor on women. These are the stories we chose. And then I had a young actress from NSD, who had passed out of NSD, who I felt had a flair for writing, to help or to do the scripting. And with selection of the stories, we started the process of improvisation, and so basically selected 4 stories showing 4 different aspects, and began the process of improvisation. Now, maybe I'll talk while I'm showing you some photographs. I didn't select videos because I was nervous about how the technology will work here. But while I'm showing you some photographs, maybe I'll talk about the process of devising that. But normally for a play like, let's say, Aur Kitne Tukde, which was based on partition, the work would start from actually dealing with issues that this uh, text would involve. So if the issues were loss, issues were displacement, issue was honor, issue was memories, issue was sort of uh, innocence, loss of innocence, issue was longing, then we would begin improvisations with that, so that the entire group of people which is there to work on the script comes onto the same page as me. I have already, before I begin, I have done a lot of reading and I've done a lot of thinking about the issue, but those who have come together have not done that, and therefore to get them equally involved before they can actually contribute to the process of building that play, one would work on these ideas. So the improvisations would be around these ideas. And this was very fascinating, how different people brought different perspectives, different ideas, different body languages, and all of it that got built up. And it is at that point that we also decided that we will be doing this play as somebody today remembering the past. So we were also playing with the idea of memory and how memory is mediated with time, how memory is mediated with social values, how memory is mediated in, sort of according to your context and time. So we played with those ideas, and then sort of worked on these stories. And as we were sort of what we had done is selected portions of the interview, which we would work on later, and when we were improvising, the things that came up were then scripted and put into some shape. Uh, and so this is how the script was also devised alongside the rehearsals. But the actors were never really told that you have to stick to the script. I mean, that was happening quite naturally once they had, because, you know, there was also a great sense of ownership. It was their ideas which were then getting scripted. So there was, you know, sort of borrowing from 5 people, a little scene was being created. So I would imagine that if you were to talk to those actors today, they would say that we created the play. You know, sort of, I did the script. Each one would feel that they did the script. So it is that, you know, this is how the collective things work. So I'll first show you the slides of these two plays, Subarnalata and Aur Kitne Tukde, and I'll be talking in the background as I am showing you. Now let me see if I can manage this. So I'm doing share screen. Can you see it? Chandradas, can you see them? No?
No, madam.
No, ma'am. No, it's not coming, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Try saying your screen sharing is paused. Just,
Not seen, please. It's not seen.
no, just. Now can you see? Can you see now?
No,
Yes,
no.
ma'am. You have to click on the picture, ma'am. Click on
No,
the
madam.
picture.
Double click on the pic, ma'am.
Double click. Yes, yes.
Now you can see? No, it's saying your screen sharing is paused.
Oh.
And it's saying resume share, but it's not resuming. Can you see this?
No.
Achha, let me just take it away and just a minute. I don't know how to do this.
Kirti madam, first you open the picture, minimize it, then take it on Zoom, share screen.
Take it on Zoom and then do share screen.
No. First you have to open the picture and minimize it.
Yeah, I've opened the picture and minimize it. Okay.
Then minimize it, then come to Zoom, then share screen. You can see the picture there. Then click on the picture.
No, I can't. I can't see the picture now. When I open it beforehand, I can't see the picture. See, we tried it and now it's not happening. Just a minute. Now you can see it?
We tried.
Can you see it now?
No, please.
You are not sharing it.
Yes.
I'm sharing it, but it's somehow not showing.
First you minimize Zoom, then take the picture. First minimize Zoom, then open the picture.
Just I knew this would happen. Yeah. Now minimize the picture.
Then minimize the picture, come back to Zoom.
Zoom cloud meeting or Zoom? Okay. Now I can't even open Zoom.
You can click on
There
the
are two
desktop
options in
icon.
Zoom: Cloud Meetings and Zoom. Which one should I open?
That you click both.
No, which one
by
first?
one.
Click on the screen, ma'am. Click on the screen.
Nothing is working. I can see my face on one side, but clicking on that is not helping. Ah, now that's
Yeah,
okay.
there is a, yeah.
Now share.
Then you do the screen, yeah. Do the share
Yeah.
screen.
Uh,
You can see the picture there. Then
Yeah.
click on that picture. Click the picture. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Now it is shared.
you sure?
Yes.
Why is it not becoming?
Yes,
Okay.
click on that picture.
No. You are opening the show. Madam, you have opened the folder, not the picture.
Yeah, but I put the picture there. This
That we
You
can
have to open the
yes, the smaller size. Now we can see the picture in the smaller size and the
Yes.
album.
You
Enlarge
see it now?
only.
You can see it now?
We can see it in a small.
It's not enlarged.
It's enlarged, not, but we can see it, but not enlarged.
Yes, correct.
So then I remove it.
Okay.
Should I remove this? What should I do? Should we drop the idea of photographs?
No, you can even we can understand what's happening. You can just tell about it.
Yes.
So we can see the icons actually, but it's not actually enlarged. That's the
That's
We can see
surprising.
the icons. Yes, we can see the icons.
I can't enlarge it. There's no way of enlarging.
Yeah.
That's
Now?
okay, madam. Please elaborate it. Please talk. Please talk. That's okay. You are saying.
Okay, so this is the one that I'm talking. This is, she's with the dolls under a table. Now, the other thing that, sort of when I'm devising, I normally try to use very minimal sets and sets props. Also because it allows for a certain flexibility. And I very strongly feel that any prop on stage, anything on stage, has to have a life like a character on stage. So it has to keep changing. It has to be dynamic. It has to, which you will find in most of the plays that I have done. That sort of it has to have a life of its own as well. So of course here we use a table, which is, we pretend it's a bed, which is where she keeps her little trunk, where her dolls are there and her bed is there, and she talks to them about her past, about her mother, about how this mother-in-law talks to her and how she makes fun of her mother and how she feels humiliated, etc. So this allowed us to also introduce her as a child. It allowed her to introduce us to her inner world, and it allowed us to get to know what has happened to her in the past few years ever since her marriage, or how did she get married like this, because it was against the wishes of her mother, etc. Can you see this? No? No.
You go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead. It is fine.
I'm feeling very sad because the photographs would give some idea of what's happening. Now can you see? No. Okay.
You have to share, madam.
Yes.
I've shared.
नहीं मैडम दिख नहीं रहा है
हाँ तो छोड़ते हैं
बातें सुन रहे हैं।
I'll
छोड़
drop
दीजिए हाँ बातें कर सकते हैं ना बातें सुन सकते हैं।
Okay. That's sad because I'd collected so many slides. Anyway, so basically, sort of the way we were using that table, in fact, that I think was the only set on stage most of the time. But that table then was used for her mother-in-law coming and sitting on top of that, and she is under that. So it also showed that how the mother-in-law is the boss of the family, how she dominates, how she's sitting in a space where she can keep an eye on everyone, how, sort of. So it was a lot of other hierarchical relationships that came to the fore, and this same table is used in different ways throughout the play. But I was showing this only how one can begin with an image. When I was doing Aur Kitne Tukde, there were many more challenges because we didn't have a script. We had 4 completely different stories. The fact of having to knit them together was also quite important. So, we had chosen 4 stories and 4 different formats of telling them. One of them was like a monologue about this woman who was from a rich family but is abducted by a man from another religion. A Muslim girl who was abducted by a Hindu man and brought home. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Madam?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So, who was brought home, and this is a farmer family, sort of a lower class family. She finds it very difficult to adjust, and she's always longing for going back. And she's very confident that her brother will come and take her back, but that doesn't happen. So it's a very different kind of relationship. But then, since it was a monologue, I gave her a task of choosing a prop which would become like her co-actor, and it would also be there to reflect what kind of life she's leading today. So after a lot of selection, we reached of her using a charpai. You know what a charpai is? A cot which is woven with rassi. So it was rough, it was textured, it very clearly indicated a very rustic life, and it kind of became her companion. So she would play with it, she would sleep on it, she would hide under it. At a point, it also became the border, it became the wall, it became a hiding place. So when sort of it was quite interesting how the play was evolving. We had to the monologue we had kept is when she was actually abducted and taken, and how she was looking at the eyes of her father who lay dead, who couldn't protect her. So a game with a rope with her present husband converts into him dragging her across the border, so that at that point that charpai became the border. And she is being pulled and brought into a new space. So how these properties were changing character, how they were becoming companions, how they were also telling another story and different dimension of a story was quite interesting. I mean, I wish I could show you, then I could talk about many more things related to the picture, but since I can't show you the images. Similarly, the task of having to deal with another character who was from again a very rich family but had come, her breasts had been cut in the rail compartment, and she just looks forward to getting back home somehow. But when she reaches home, her father doesn't allow her to come because he feels that she has been defiled and therefore she cannot be admitted to the family. And so she works as a social worker. And 40 years later, her sister searching for her reaches her. And we wanted to indicate that, she's working in an ashram. So what do we do? What kind of activity? And therefore we had piles of cloth which she is tearing and making into different dresses for women who are in that ashram. So how do we communicate that? How this other co-actor who was actually a polio patient, but an old friend of mine, very keen on acting, We introduced her, but because of her, we then decided that we'll keep 2 stools on which they'll sit, because she couldn't walk very fast, she couldn't sit on the floor, and therefore that allowed for a different kind of design to, and people read a lot of meaning into our placing them at a distance and talking from that distance. So how certain imperatives turn into meaning in a kind of devised situation. And how stylistically different it allowed us to be in different scenes. For instance, this actress who was doing this character, whose breasts were cut, is a very powerful actress, and therefore she could really, sort of do this action in a much larger than life manner than most other situations demanded, or the actor's capability. So we could actually turn into, sort of this hyperacting when she was doing her bit, when her breasts are cut, or when she's narrating that her breasts were cut, and how people, came around and what they did. So that was another kind of challenge. The third story was, in fact, that was the most moving story as far as I am. I'm very sorry if somebody is finding it mumbling. Can you hear me clearly?
Sure, ma'am. It is very clear.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So the third story, which I found extremely moving, was about a woman who had attempted to jump into a well when other women from her village were all committing suicide, jumping into the well, because they felt that the enemy had come to the nearby village and soon they would come here and defy the women. So to protect the honor, in inverted commas, of the community, they were jumping into the well. She jumped, but she couldn't drown because there were too many women and there was not enough water, and therefore she was saved. Now this is a real story, because this was a real interview by Urvashi. So she was saved, and so she questions at that point that, I think I was happy that I was saved. Maybe it was wrong to feel happy, but I was happy. And then she carried her son from there, hid and carried her son to this side of the border, somehow managed to reach here, and she was still living at that time when we were doing the play. And Urvashi pointed out that it was so amazing that the person who took Urvashi to her was actually her son, but he did not tell Urvashi that he was the son, because he felt ashamed that this woman was his mother, because the community where everybody had resettled after partition all felt that she was a, sort of a shame for that community because she did not become a martyr. So this woman had actually lived 50 years of her life with a sense of shame, a sense of, being like an outcast, even by her own son, who she saved and brought here, was the story that we had chosen to show. So we were working in a nursery school. The rehearsal space was in a nursery school, and since in the earlier phase we were doing a lot of, sort of games and children's activities as memory, and what connects you to a land, the childhood memories. So that was the reason why we were working on childhood games. So at one point the actors had brought in a slide, sort of where you slide down. These are normally there in schools, and they were playing on that. And once they were playing on that, it suddenly struck me that what if we convert this playing into an enactment of jumping into the well. And that's what we tried to do. Of course, the actors initially were very appalled, and they said that we can't be making fun of something so tragic that happened. But you had to tell them that these are children who are recalling what happened. Children who are saying that my grandmother told me, or my grand aunt told me that they jumped into the well. and that women jumped into the well. So I said, for children, it's just a game. And therefore, it's not being disrespectful to the tragedy. But somehow that scene worked very well as it gradually transformed from a game that children today are playing, and then suddenly starting to recall what their relatives have told them, and then it becoming actually the scene where women were jumping and drowning, and how this woman was saved. So this was also to tell you that how accidents play a very important role in the way sort of plays emerge and the scenes emerge and the situations emerge, but how the fact that it turned from game to the tragedy became that much more poignant and that much more highlighted and that much more theatrical. So it's something which, it's a combination of chance and luck and the possibility of actually being able to play around with what you have around you. So that can convert, that can change, and that can become the text itself. So, sort of these were some of the ideas that, we worked on while we were doing that. And the primary focus, of course, in all this was how women actually lacked choices, how women were actually made sites of honor without, them choosing to be that. And that particular play also became a huge learning experience. Every day was exciting and exploratory because we discovered new aspects about ourselves, about our actors, about our team. For instance, one of the exercises I gave my actors was because it was about displacement. One of the exercises I gave them was that, suppose you have just 5 minutes, that, you have to just leave the village immediately, otherwise you might get killed. So what is it that you'll take from that house? You can just take, just one small action is possible. What can be done in 5 minutes? So, sort of predictably, some of them wanted to show how good they were. So some of them carried their old parent out. Somebody looked for a diary, carried that out. Sort of some of the very predictable actions that you take something which is most dear to you. But what stays with me today is one of the actors who took those 2 minutes to just tidy up her bedroom. So she put the chadar properly. She just put the the picture of the goddess where it was. She straightened the frames on the wall. I mean, the enactment of that. Looked around before she made an exit whether the room looked okay, and moved out. And that stayed with me as a kind of sort of revelation of what all people think about at that critical moment, or can think about. How different it is from probably what I might think, what I will do as a last resort, what I will take with me as a last resort. She wanted to take the picture of a good, clean house that she has left behind. Now that was, again, sort of these processes teach you so much about life, about people, about different responses, and that was very moving. With that, I sort of move to the next. Not I will not go in that chronology, but one of the plays that raised another set of questions. I was very, very worked up about American occupation of Iraq or American attack on Iraq, and also generally the kind of role, the dominating role that the US takes about the world, as though they were assigned the role of the policeman of the world. That used to make me very angry, and how they have been destroying countries after countries. Now this idea was there from the time the first Iraq war happened, and it was festering, but I couldn't find the right kind of tonality with which to deal with it, or the right kind of material which would lead me to that thing. till I came across an internet blog called Baghdad Burning. It was written by an Iraqi woman in Baghdad while the American occupation was happening. And what attracted me to it was uh, the kind of sort of wittiness with which it was written. So at one level, it was capturing very accurately the day-to-day life of the people, how they were struggling to just stay afloat, stay alive, keep their sense of humor alive, keep their aspirations alive, keep the optimism alive. So that was one level, and the second was very, very sharp critique of the American government. So there were two aspects to this whole blog. One was about the daily lives of people, and the second one was, it was constantly punctuated with political commentary on the callousness of the U.S. Establishment. So for us, for me, the primary two challenges that it was my concern. I did not know if the actors who are going to work with me feel that strongly about this issue. And why am I doing it? Why am I doing it for an Indian audience? So when we got together, we tried to look for the commonalities. Whether we in India at any level, because I kept questioning myself that why am I reacting so strongly to this situation? It's not happening to me. It's happening to people there. So what is it? And then one realized that around us, whether it is Kashmir or it is the Northeast, these things are constantly happening, and we are just, sort of helpless bystanders to what's happening. So maybe it was that which was kind of finding a voice. It was my anger at, sort of the power the the state enjoys to be able to kill or crush the common people anywhere in the world. So we started exploring that idea. And because I had a cast which was a mix of people from all over the country, it was easy for them to relate to this kind of, repression of the state anywhere. And they came up with ideas and improvisations with which they could connect. So the whole, I think, the first 20 days of the rehearsal process of 1.5 months was actually dedicated to looking at the ideas that I was concerned about. So the idea of repression, the idea of lack of freedom to move around, the idea of humiliation in your own country, in your own space, in your own city, the idea of the inequality of, sort of the common man, and within that, the normalcy. The supposed normalcy of everyday life. These were some of the ideas that we were trying to deal with. So, and I still remember one of the exercises, which was for me very moving, that I had asked them to create a ritual. I'd asked all the actors to create one small action, which they would repeat. So if it's a 10-second action, they would keep on repeating so that it becomes a kind of ritual, but which would reflect their response to some, sort of some repression by the state or their taking away of their freedom. But to be reflected through not speaking, just a small action which is repetitive. And different people that did different kinds of things. But one of the boys did an action where he would move 2 steps, he would raise both hands like this, then he would raise both hands like this, and then lie down on the floor with hands in front. Then would get up, move 2 steps, again raise hand like this, raise like this, and prostrate on the floor. And this kind of brought so strongly this image of surveillance, of security, of, sort of these checkpoints where the citizens of that city are subjected to from day to day. Now, he was from Assam and he had seen it. I'm sure people from Manipur had faced it. I'm sure people from Kashmir have faced it. And that immediately, I think, also struck the rest of the team how close it is to us, what's happening out there. So, I mean, these processes really allow us to become part of that whole narrative. And then the second challenge for me was to create different languages, theatrical languages, for um, for one which was more naturalistic, which was dealt with more daily life, and the other one was much more stylized and through larger images, this idea of the political commentary that she was giving. And what was very fascinating was that it was full of wit and humor. The political commentary particularly was very scathing, but very satirical. So, and that's what attracted me to the script, that it was not at all sentimental, but very strong and very matter of fact. Similarly, the one other thing, now since I'm not able to show the images, I think connecting to it is difficult. But one more thing that I remember, and that was very fascinating for me also in the process, is that I was doing a play on the earthquake in Gujarat. I was to do a play with students. And my very strong sense was that the students our students at NSD do not always connect very well, or do not, let's say, feel very concerned, or their work doesn't show concern about sort of the kind of happenings around us. And therefore, so becomes an island, that while a huge earthquake has happened, lots of people have lost lives, belongings, have become displaced. The work at NSD would not change. The vision at NSD would not change. And that we would not even know how to empathize or understand the dilemma or the problems or the tragedy of a large section of the people of our country. So I thought maybe just working on that might help us to start looking at what's happening around us. Again, for me, there was a personal trigger. There was a person, it was almost about 10 months after the earthquake. But there was a person who visited, who was a doctor, and who gave some description of what happened when they went to Bhuj to help, and how the state just pretended that nothing is wrong, they don't need help, and therefore they were not provided the facilities, but they then helped in makeshift facility. So that became the trigger for sort of talking about the earthquake, making the political comment. But then I thought that we need a more detailed account of what really happened. Now, we had two options. It was possible that I could have gone and actually seen for myself the scale of destruction, talked to people, found out myself. But I always feel that creativity is somewhat stifled if you have encountered the actual, because then you tend to represent. And therefore, I requested two of my colleagues, Abhilash and Dinesh, to go to Bhuj, collect material, research, talk to people, bring stories, and based on that, we did the play. Now, so one was trying to then creatively look at situations that had happened and how you translate them into a theatrical language. But what I wanted to say was that it allowed, sort of several actions to happen simultaneously in a very little space. It was just a 30 feet by 30 feet space where we were playing this, but it has little nooks and corners. So we could actually have multiple actions happening, people living their displaced lives in small clusters, and maybe different audiences would see different things. But what was even more interesting was that one of the actors, finally, when we chose little episodes, he didn't find any important role in those sections that we thought of elaborating and improvising. And he, when an improvisation was happening, he said, can I enter, even though I don't have a role, can I enter this improvisation? I said, of course you can enter. It's always open because we don't have a script. We will be going along and deciding what should be shown and what should, how we'll play it. So he played the little child. He, because we had heard stories of how children had become displaced. They had lost their entire families. Lot of them had lost their mental balance. They were completely lost. They were without a home. They were without anybody who will take care of them. So this boy, this actor, was a good actor. He entered one of the improvisations as that child who stood looking at what was happening, just went to one of the characters, asked for a glass of water, and then strolled out. Then he sat somewhere else, started playing. What happened as a result, it was not planned, it was not thought about, but by the end of our improvisations, he became a kind of central character in the play, because he had the freedom to move from one space to another, and he actually started embodying the kind of displacement that's happened, the kind of repercussions of that displacement that have happened. And that to me was also telling me that this is the strength of devising, that it can allow actors space if they have enough imagination and initiative to find a space for themselves. It can allow changes in focus to happen midway if we choose. For instance, while we were doing this play, the Gujarat riots happened. And then it was very difficult to take a topical issue, working on a topical issue, not include another thing which was so immediate. So somehow we had to change the last scene as we were playing it to kind of also indicate that there is violence that has happened, and how, some of the people within the play became the targets of that. So all these experiences are experiences of having gone through this process of devising, which I find personally very enriching, because every single day of the process is a huge learning experience. You live so many lives, so many situations, so many representations, or let's say so many responses to whatever material you are working on. And therefore, to me, that is the only method to be working, partly also because it's very difficult to find a text which is saying exactly what you want to say, and saying it in the way that you want to say it. So therefore I find this for me as a personal process, I find it a useful process. Should I just make one last, and my lecture is over, should I make one last attempt at being able to show you some photographs?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So now just tell me again what I should do. I should open the picture.
Follow Sudhir. Follow Sudhir.
Tell me.
Sudhir.
I can't hear. Sudhir, I can't hear Sudhir. Can you see?
No.
Nothing happening, ma'am.
Huh? No.
No. No.
Okay, I see. And then we'll give up. Don't bother. So any questions now? Okay.
Yeah, now it's can come up with questions, comments. You can directly unmute your mic and talk, or type it here. For those people on Facebook also can type it there. We can read it to Kirti Jain ji. Please come.
Hello, ma'am. This is Jolly. Ma'am, it was a very interesting lecture, and it was so surprising that as a student of theatre, I have seen one of your production. I was wondering at why this production has a little bit of realistic approach in some places and a stylized approach in some other places. So I was like a little confused. But now when I realized that it was your own choice, so it was so very happy to realize that such choices were taken in such 90s itself and put in shows, and it was so wonderful.
Which play did you see?
I think it is in this Tukke or what is that?
Or Kitne Tukde?
Or Kitne Tukde. Yeah, okay. Or Kitne Tukde. So that is what, and I would also like you to talk, since your concentration was on the devising. So how this devising is applied in the process drama now, which you are doing, isn't it? You are into process drama. Yeah. So how this devising helping you to apply that in the process drama is one question. And also, if you have time and if there is not much questions, please do elaborate upon your Himatima play, Breast Mother Kurash, you know.
I didn't do that.
You didn't do that. Okay, okay. No. So, okay, that was my mistake. Okay, all right then. That's okay. The only thing. Yeah.
The process of devising is improvisational. And we do use improvisation as one of the strategies in process drama. But I think there is not too much other connection, because this work is about doing theatre. I mean, you know, working towards a theatre performance. While the process drama is nothing to do with performance at all. It is not about performativity at all. It is about just using some of the theatre strategies to engage children, to get them to understand the issue in question, and to then find their solutions and their answers, or find their questions relating to that issue. So if I were to give you an example, in process drama, suppose we were doing a history lesson on Mughals. I remember one of our facilitators telling the students that, you know, Akbar is very worried about, these are about 8th class students. He told them that Akbar is very worried about the kind of, you know, sort of discord between the communities, Hindus and Muslims. And he wants that this should not happen. And now you as a class is his council of ministers. Imagine that you are his council of ministers. He'll be coming in a little while to talk to you, but please think of what all you can advise him to do, to the steps that he can take to reduce this discord, to reduce the tensions. Now the students, you know, sort of, they were made to sit in groups, and they were made to, you know, sort of think of different solutions. And when this facilitator then comes back as Akbar to talk to them, it was amazing the kind of things they talked about, and which was so much to do with the present, which was so much to do with what they were seeing around them. And that is what is very beautiful about process drama, that it uses the theatre techniques to get them to understand that what the issue really is all about. What are the steps we take? So when you're teaching them about Deen-e Ilahi, they may not even register. But once they reach through that, through this process, this was one of the answers that they were giving. I mean, all of them were actually moving towards that answer. And there were many more answers which were very creative and very imaginative. So it became, history was not just the past, but it also became the present. It was not just about Akbar, but it was also about them. And it was they who were finding the answers. And this is what, these are some of the strategies that you use to actually get them to relate to what the issue is and then to find question. And at the end of it, there is a great sense of ownership in the child that he found the answer. He knows what is to be done. He goes into the mind of the person that you are talking about, because you're taken into the mind of the person. So you sometimes talk about a property owned by a person and you say, why do you think she might have kept this with her? It is this person. What could be the reason? What was her childhood like? And sort of they find the answers. Maybe the lesson is talking about all that, but they don't know the lesson, but they come up with most of those things. So it's only the theatre strategies that process drama uses. It doesn't get into enactment at all. Not to performance. It might use enactment only as a strategy in improvisations.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, this is Upendra from Bangalore, madam.
Yeah.
The amount of freedom and the improvisation which leads the process of constructing a devised play means, if I have a question, that where do we move and what is the end for it and what is the objective for it, because it is very fluid. If you have some concrete objective and content, there is a sort of achievement also comes in, because today we have devised a play and tomorrow it will change and day after also it will change, means then what do we get? What sort of joy or what sort of trajectory which we move inside the framework, something called devised theatre? Always it comes to my mind.
Yeah, I have a feeling that sort of at least the kind of work that I have done, it has not been completely unmoored. I mean, I wouldn't go on the floor and say, let's improvise. I would go on the floor with an idea in my head that, okay, I want to work on XYZ idea. And the idea would be actually the seed. So let's say when we were working on Aur Kitne Tukde, we knew that we were working on partition. And within partition, there can be so many issues. But if one were to begin with the exploration part of it, as I said, that, we designed, I mean, I had to think of what are the central ideas that we are going to explore in this process to bring all the actors on board about what all we are dealing with. So whether it is the idea of loss, we do improvisations around that. You have to give them a situation around the idea of loss to be able to explore what loss means to them. Then if you were to deal with the idea of displacement, then you tell them, give an improvisation related to that, which you might want to then further explore or develop for using in the play. So I don't think that in devising you can just leave it loose-ended. I mean, otherwise you're right, it will lead nowhere. You know where you want to lead, but the only thing is that you will not create the content all by yourself and you will not create the structure all by yourself. You will explore together and keep creating units together. And that is, but the focus has to be very clear. For instance, even when I was working on Aur Kitne Tukde, when I collected the material, it was going in all kinds of directions because there are 1001 stories of partition, 1001 experiences of partition. I had to, for the sake of the play, decide that what is bothering me the most about it. And I felt that the silences around partition are largely to do with the way women are placed in our family. The thing is that you will not create the content all by yourself, and you will not create. Sorry, I can't hear. Did somebody ask a question?
No.
I'll just continue. That it was, I had to make a focus area. I had to decide that it will be only about choice and about honor, these ideas. But to reach this idea of choice and honor, I needed to familiarize the actors and the team to the various ideas that were feeding into it. And these were some of the ideas around partition, on which we did improvisations and from which we started culling out material, culling out characterizations, culling out situations, culling out locations. So, so in sort of the graph started becoming clearer as we went along. For instance, towards the end, we then had the task that, all right, we've developed these 4 stories, but how do we connect them? They're so unconnected. And then we have to work on strategies of how to make the connection, whether sometimes through music, sometimes through the visual, sometimes even through text and the way it related. We made it relate the last of the first of the next scene. So I don't think it can happen, or it will be worthwhile if it was just open-ended without any focus. I think that either the person who's getting the team together decides, but if it's an existing team, then maybe the team decides that this is what we'll work on, and then they start work. It can't be just completely loose-ended, because then you're right that there is no end. But I must say that something like this is so heavily contextualized that it does lose some meaning when it's out of that context. So something which I have done, let's say 20 years back, will lose some of its meaning when I repeat it. And it will definitely lose most of its meaning if the actors who are working with me are no longer the people who went through that whole process of internalizing that situation. These are not the kind of plays that can be, somebody else learns the lines and does it. Because it was result of a process, I think the process becomes very important for it to become alive again today. So very often when we had repeat shows of this play, my actors would say that 3 days are fine, we will remember. We remember the lines, we can do it. But I knew that then it became more and more mechanical, and therefore we had to stop it, because yes, they remembered the lines, and yes, they knew how to emote because they were all very good actors. But it did not have the energy that it had when we opened the show, because these were people who had lived through that experience at that point in time. And they were, sort of living with that energy, and they were playing it with that energy. So devised plays certainly have an immediacy when they're first performed and lose some of their immediacy over a period of time.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
So you are saying that from performance to performance also it is developing further and changing, keeping the basic structure intact.
It can.
What's your think like?
It hasn't happened very much in my plays, partly because sort of I do depend on a script writer, sort of I don't keep it that loose-ended. Having had the improvisations and things, there is finally a script that we have. And because there is a script, so there is then a defined structure that is there. The only thing is that all of us have contributed towards that script, and therefore we all feel it's our script, and therefore the sense of identification with situations, characters, and everything is that much greater with every word. What changes is when the space changes, when the let's say the location changes. So I remember having done that Tinka Tinka, which was the play about earthquake. Bhuj earthquake, having done it in Bhuj was a completely different experience for me, because I felt it was wrong to have done it there. 1 year after they have lived through that trauma and trying to forget that trauma and move on in life, we go and show them a play which is about them, and sort of reigniting that trauma. So the sense of discomfort when we were playing it there was very strong. Of course, we'd gone because they were very insistent that we played there, and the response was very moving, because all of them felt very happy that somebody sitting in Delhi, some people sitting in Delhi thought about them, and that they recreated their situations very accurately. But ethically, I found that was a wrong thing. But what I'm saying is that the meaning of doing it in Delhi, where we were trying to sensitize people to somebody else who has faced the tragedy, to actually playing it in Bhuj, where we are playing it in front of people who have gone through that tragedy, had two different meanings altogether. And I'm sure that even for the actors, the meaning must have changed when they were playing it there. The kind of tension that was there was very different from what it was when we were playing it in Delhi, because the objectives were so very different. But yeah, as I said, the plays don't undergo any major change except for sort of adjustment of space. And I must say that the space plays a very important part in devised plays, because you start owning the space where you are rehearsing. And when you therefore, sort of shift to, let's say, another space, it loses that sense of belonging. It loses the familiarity, and it loses its immediacy. So these are difficult places to travel, from one space to another. They really are quite grounded in wherever you are rehearsing. It may be an open ground, it may be a room, it may be anything, maybe a terrace. But then that becomes the space, and you imagine around that space. Because devising is like that. Devising is with each prop that you use, you give it meaning. You change the prop, even if it looks exactly the same. The actors are uncomfortable. They say, "ये तो बहुत light है, इससे वो नहीं आ रहा." And I can understand that it changes meaning for them. So these become very different kind of problems. Somebody mentioned about misconceptions on devising.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, what was it?
Shogan, can you come on say it more clearly?
I didn't read the whole question.
Yeah. Ashokan, can you hear me? Ashokan, are you there? So what I understand is, I don't know, about devising theatre. There's a misconception in India that it becomes a kind of propaganda theatre. Like we want to say something of a propaganda. So how to make people more sensitized to the social issues, etc.
I would say that devising is used also for political theatre, I mean agitprop theatre, because they have to deal with the everyday, so today there's one situation and they have to create a play tomorrow to reach out with a message. So it will necessarily have to be devised. But I think different people work with in different processes, different objectives, different outcomes. So for instance, if any of you have seen Maya's work, Maya devises, constantly is devising her own work, and it would change from, let's say, one audience to another, because she alone is performing, and therefore she doesn't have to worry about how the co-actor will get unsettled if she changes text or if she changes movement. But she's able to, which doesn't mean that she's not rehearsing and giving it a context. she is as she was working on her own, preparing for that performance. But from audience to audience, she has the freedom to be able to change both text and the actual performance, which may not be so easy when there is a collective at work. For instance, when Anamika works, I find that a very important part of her work is to do with actually actors, sort of connecting to the central idea of the text that they are working on, or the situation that they are working on. So I remember that when she came to NSD once to work on a play called Raj Darpan, which was essentially a play based on research work, but around the idea of the Censorship Act, when the Censorship Act was promulgated in India. And because she had to work on that, why the censorship was required, so she was working with this whole idea of colonial rule and colonial rule in India. There she's dealing with the idea of theatre in India, she was dealing with the idea of colonial rule in India. She was therefore dealing with the idea of colonial attitudes in India, whether they're still there. We are not only talking of the time when it was imposed, but it's there even now. The censorship rule is there even now. So what is it in us today? So can we just put the responsibility on the establishment that the state wants to control, and therefore the rule is going on? Or is it something in all of us? And it was amazing how the students coming from different regions in NSD discovered how many of these, hierarchical notions of superiority and inferiority of the ruler and the ruled, of divides are still there within us. We've internalized them. How, let's say, we encounter a villager as a city person, how when we encounter a villager, the way we talk patronizingly to them compared to another city person that we encounter, stranger. How we talk to a person who doesn't speak English or can't speak English. What is our attitude towards that person? Now, all these are indicators of the kind of attitudes we still hold. And she works very intensively on that internal. She really pushes her actors to exploring themselves, questioning themselves in relation to whatever script that they may be working on. That where do they stand in relation to the script? And I find that a very, very interesting approach in terms of really theatre as a means of exploration.
Yeah. Kirti ji, I have a question to you. I am Dr. Ajay Joshi from Pune. You spoke about doing, especially when you have a material like interviews, there's one possibility where you collect the interviews and you would process it, and your actors, trained actors, would actually talk of those narratives. I'm sure you have you worked with the possibility of this interview or these narratives being spoken by the people who have actually experienced it, who have been in an earthquake or in a flood or in some personal tragedies. And then did you find, if you had done that kind of work, was there some different technique which you used when you're working, when you have a body of interviews done by trained actors or people from the community? Have you tried the other way also? I'm just curious to know, because I've seen this kind of an experiment done in Georgia, the European Georgia, especially with the refugees and migrant communities, where interviews were collected from the community itself, and then they were devised and done by actors, and some of these actors were people from the community. And so that sharing was happening. So I don't know whether you have done any kind of device work that way.
There are two aspects to this. One is that whether I have done it, no, I have not done it. I have only worked with actors. The second one, when you're saying that we take the actual people who have gone through it to put forward what they have gone through, I find it a very difficult terrain to work on. I also feel very worried all the time that it might be exploitative in the sense of, sort of using emotion of the kind that, oh, you know, sort of these are the poor people who have gone through it. So what it does to the audience, how I respond as an audience to that, is something which, you know, sort of as a director or as a theatre person, I will be very, very careful when I do that. But yes, I have also seen performances where those who are part of the performing team are also people who have faced this. That would definitely make it more immediate for them. That would definitely make it more personal for them. And therefore, I think will have a greater immediacy and a greater poignancy and a greater urgency to it. But ultimately, I think their primary identity would be those of performers. That they happen to be also people who have faced it would be secondary, is my assumption. Because when you say that you collect interviews and then you devise it with people who have also gone through it, this is already a stage away. They're not telling their experience, but they are enacting somebody else's experience. Somebody else's experience of a situation of which they have also been a part. So I have a feeling that when we are dealing with that kind of material, one has to be extremely sensitive, and also sensitive that you're not exploiting the emotion of the audience in the process, because we are in the field of performance. So I would much rather, you know, sort of make it that safe. As I said, that even performing in front of the actual people who have faced it was very uncomfortable. It was extremely uncomfortable, and therefore it was very uncomfortable every time we did that partition play and people came to us with their real life experience. So for instance, this jumping into a well scene in the play, after a performance, one lady came to me and she said that, you know, I work in National School of Drama. No, she began by saying that I'm glad I didn't bring my mother to see the play. I said, oh, why didn't you? Because, you know, she would have related more to it. She says, no, she had also jumped into a well and didn't drown and survived. Now that really was something I couldn't handle emotionally, because I was so emotionally invested in the story that I couldn't even imagine that somebody who's actually gone through it, you know, I have known her daughter for 10 years and I didn't know her. Or that somebody came to me and said after the play, out of just from nowhere, and he says that, you know, I have a feeling that my grandmother is a Muslim. He was a Hindu. So I said, you have a feeling, you don't know? He said, no. I said, how? He says, because we have never asked. But my grandfather had gone to one of the relief camps and married there, so we have a feeling that they were. Then I got to know that they were scared to ask, because what if she were a Muslim? Because they were a fairly hardcore Hindu or Hindutva family, and they didn't want this known. So for me, my mind immediately went to the plight of the woman who's lived a life of anonymity for 50 years, and nobody has asked her what's her background, who she is, what does she want, what is her desire. So all these are very unnerving. You know, this real, unreal encounter is very disturbing, and it'll, you know, so it doesn't allow you to work with any objectivity. It's a problem for me. That may be my problem. Also because probably I work with issues which I feel very strongly about, and therefore I get very unnerved. Possible.
Thank you, ma'am.
In that respect, you know, you said you go for devising a play because you are not happy with the text available. And
not happy or unhappy, but it's not saying what I want to talk about.
Yes, that's it. And the thing is that, you know, your choice of issues which you want to speak through are very immediate, political, like partition, gender issues, all those things. And you go with an idea and start improvising, inviting experiences, incidents from the actors to create the narrative. So in that improvisation, there's a chance that the actors may bring in their own personal experiences, relationships, which may be highly personal and very emotional, very tough things. So the thing which you said just now, that this personal explosion of emotions and dealing into that may happen there also. And how could you relate this personal experience of the actors to the central content and central broader idea which you want to bring in? How does the connection takes place? And
as I explained to you, that the connection takes place as one of the examples I'd given about the, when I was working on Baghdad burning, of how this person created the image, the ritual of, surveillance, of search, personal search. So that's one thing that sort of brought it to his immediate. But the other way of making the connection is through improvisation. So when I'm talking about the idea of loss, in my mind, I'm talking about the loss at the time of partition. But when I'm asking all of them to talk about their idea of loss, do an improvisation around loss, we are all seeing each other's work and realizing what it meant to him when he or she lost this one, that we get to know what is most important or dear to him, which creates this kind of sort of disturbance in him or her. And the second is that then it's easier to make the transition from that loss to this loss, the degree or or to be able to connect that you felt this when you lost, let's say, your diary. But what happens to a person then? They look at the intensity or the scale of a person who loses everything. It's not just a diary. It's not just that one toy that somebody gave you on a very special occasion. It's not just that one dress. It's not just sort of one item of jewelry. It's not just one thing. It's everything. Your whole identity, your whole past, your whole connection, everything is lost. So they find it easier to transition from understanding of one personal loss to a complete loss of somebody. I think what I keep telling my actors, that even if we are able to reach 1% of what that person might have felt, we might have, somewhere built a bridge in that relationship. That's all we can do. We can never fathom the scale of the loss of another person. We can only try to reach out by understanding partially what that might have meant, and that we can only do through empathy, through understanding what a given loss meant to us, and therefore what a larger loss could mean to somebody else. So that's the only way we relate. But through improvisation, what we do succeed in doing is getting, sort of the ideas that construct that narrative do get, articulated in different contexts, each one in their own context. And it is very different for an actor to bring in a personal experience, which they do. In an improvisational process, that's exactly the beauty of it, that they do bring in personal experiences, but it has the advantage, or let's say the curtain of a fiction. So you might recognize that, oh, this is his or her personal experience, but there is a little story of a war, or of a partition, or of an earthquake that is, covering it. So he's not exposing himself, herself, totally, and yet giving it the depth because of his own personal experience. So there, it's not problematic, because the audience doesn't know this is his or her personal experience. But when we use actual people who have suffered a tragedy, you are actually telling the audience that, these are, I saw one of, this kind of play of Me Too. And no, when the gang rape had happened in Delhi, after that, somebody had worked on something like Nirbhaya. And 2-3 of them were women who had actually undergone that kind of experience. That was very uncomfortable. And it was very, I felt it was very emotionally exploitative because it didn't have the creative quality or the imaginative quality of what a work like that can bring out. But it definitely had the exploitative quality of exploiting both the performer and the audience. So I would be very careful. It can be done, it should be done, because they need an out for what they have gone through. So the community work works like that. The forum theatre works like that. I think it uses actual experiences of people. And that is valid, but it needs a definitely greater sensitivity and understanding of how it can be handled when you're dealing with actual, sort of people who have gone through trauma. I would say I wouldn't dare do it. I'm not competent to handle it.
Any more questions from anybody? Questions or comments? Or
hello.
Yeah.
Hello, madam. Your inspiring talk. It was an inspiring talk, but I could not follow the total thing because of technical problem and the audio problem. Just I want one or two words from you about the street theater, because I'm a small theater person, street theater person from Calicut, Kerala. Please.
Yeah.
Can you introduce yourself? Your name is Redmi, so can you?
Okay. My name is Vijayan, Maur Vijayan. I am a.
Vijayan. I cannot see your face fully. Otherwise, I should have identified you.
Okay. You may have just give me some words about street theater, please, madam.
Well, I haven't seen the theater you do. I do feel that street theater plays a very significant role. It has historically played a significant role in creating awareness. And I think that works primarily through devising. That's one very important branch of theater which has to constantly work through devising. But I do have also a complaint with street theater, and that is to do with the fact that, I haven't seen many plays which are creating new aesthetic languages for saying, communicating a political message. And when we are using an artistic medium like theater, a creative medium like theater, I have a feeling that both the content and its form should be equally exciting, new, surprising for an audience. It should not be that when I see a street theater, I feel, oh, it's the same old language, with the chorus and a music instrument and people going round and, sort of with stoles around them and changing character. Why can't new modes of saying things be evolved within the street theater format? My feeling, I have not come across too much, so maybe that's my limitation, but actually I do feel that the format to me remains similar to what really IPTA created. And therefore it loses some of its excitement or curiosity to watch what is happening. I think in other countries, in many other countries, a lot of new languages have come up. A lot of new ways of saying things have come up. Sort of a lot of new ways of telling stories and saying the same content has come up. But we tend to use the same structure, the same performative language to say new things, different things. So that's my only concern. And I think as artists, it is our job to also keep finding new ways of saying things. because theater is all about surprises, you know, sort of people get hooked onto it because they want to see what new challenge they have in terms of how they respond to an idea, whether it's the idea in terms of content or the idea in terms of the aesthetic language. So a new aesthetic language will definitely excite more people or connect more people over a period of time. So I think that sense of experimentation needs to apply to both content and form, which may or may not be happening. As I said, I've not seen too much, but whatever I have, I feel that that's where there is a little problem. But otherwise, I think it's a very significant medium of communicating. In today's world, for instance, things are changing so fast. Every day brings a new crisis and a new issue, that the only answer is probably street theatre, because the other theatre needs time to reflect, to articulate, to find layers, meanings, everything. Street theatre is the only mode which can comment immediately. So it's very important. It's a very significant aspect of theatre. Only it needs to be that much more imagined.
Maybe we may have time for one more question. So, anybody with the last question?
Not a question. I like to thank you, both of you, Kirti and Chandradas sir. Most of the time I'm thinking where I am, what I'm doing, kind of confusions while I'm doing. But today it's so much clear where I stepped, my step. So it's so much helpful, Kirti ji. It's a wonderful.
But Kalairani is a great example of devised work. I mean, you know, sort of the kind of political statement, the kind of devising on one's own. I think it needs the kind of discipline and talent that she has. I mean, we have learned from people like you, right? In terms of what the kind of work you create and the processes which go into making it. Very significant.
But I am like to thank very much. Really understanding more. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, anybody else?
I think it's quite a long time.
Yeah. Anaka, are you there? Any comments or anything from you?
Chandra,
yes,
yeah, okay.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm there. Should I say something, sir? Yeah. Kirti ma'am, thank you very much. मैं एक experience share करना चाहूँगी. In 2009, हमारे एक दोस्त है गोवा में जो फॉर्मल ट्रेनिंग लेके आए थे एंड ही वांटेड डू समथिंग विथ डिवाइस थिएटर. उन्होंने हम 4 एक्टर्स को बुलाया और अपनी आइडिया बता दी, एक लाइन में आइडिया बता दी. देन ही टोल्ड अस कि 2 महीने का प्रोसेस रहेगा, ये रहेगा, वो रहेगा. बट व्हेन वी आस्क्ड हिम अबाउट द स्क्रिप्ट ही सेड नो इट्स डिवाइस थिएटर एंड वी विल मेक इट. देन वी आस्क्ड सेवरल क्वेश्चंस, तो हर चीज को वही आंसर था कि हम खोज लेंगे, वी विल फाइंड इट आउट. एंड वी गॉट सो स्केयर्ड. इट वाज इन 2009. वी गॉट सो स्केयर्ड कि हम चारों लोगों ने वो एक्सपेरिमेंट के लिए मना कर दिया. एंड आई रियली रिग्रेट, क्योंकि इट वाज बिकॉज ऑफ आवर मिसकंसेप्शन कि एक फियर क्रिएट हो गया कि इस तरह से कैसे करेंगे जब स्क्रिप्ट भी सामने नहीं है, आइडिया भी क्लियर नहीं है और 4 लोग 2 महीना और क्या करेंगे. सो वी वर वर्किंग पीपल एंड तो इस तरह की चीज के लिए हम तब तैयार नहीं थे. ऑल्सो कुछ चीजें हमने देखी भी है डिवाइस थिएटर की, मगर वो देखने के बाद भी हर चीज तो सक्सेसफुल नहीं कह सकते या हर परफॉर्मेंस को ये नहीं कह सकते थे कि वो अपीलिंग था. तो इस चीज के लिए मन में एक्चुअली थोड़ा डर पैदा हुआ था. पर आज आपको सुनने के बाद I really feel कि ये सारा misconception दूर हो गया, and I understood like it is not about the performance, and we may use theater strategies to find solutions, to get experiences, to explore more and grow all together. So I should say now I am ready for it completely. आज आपको सुनने के बाद कम से कम मैंने ये पाया. Thank you very much.
Hello, good. So we've got one more person who's willing to do device theatre.
Yes, yes, definitely.
But I must tell you one thing, that it does, it is very scary when you begin, because for the director and for the team, because you don't, there is no clear shape to it. Since we're also used to be given a script and knowing where, how we have to do it and what we have to do. So very often towards the end, when I feel it's not coming together, I don't know how to tie it up. We've done lots of things, a lot of exciting things have emerged, but sometimes, sort of you really don't know how to tie it up. Till that happens, the panic remains, and one tries that as a director, you don't carry, sort of you don't give the panic to the actors, but it is very often there. But I must say that it's also a method which demands a lot from everyone. As a director, I have to think of new exercises every day, which will make the actors, bring the actors closer to the idea that we want to develop, or get them to explore more and more in the direction that I want them to go. So it needs a lot of preparation every day about what do I want the actors to do, because I can't go and tell them, let's improvise. Let's improvise on partition, suppose I were to say, or let's improvise on women's condition in partition. That's not how it will progress. It has to be from very, very specific, to do with the location, to do with the property, to do with an image, to do with whatever. So, and for the actor to then begin in this vacuum and not knowing what to relate it to, because there is no text. So it might just be a situation. It becomes quite, it does create nervousness in the beginning, but I think if both are prepared to trust each other, and hopefully the director is prepared for, working towards helping the actors to come to where you want them to reach, then it works quite well. At the end, there is a great sense of ownership in everyone. Everyone feels it's their script, their production.
Yeah.
And the last question is from me. You have been repeatedly saying that you are giving exercises to the actors when you are devising a production with a subject. So I'm asking about how do you devise your exercises? What are the kind of exercises you choose and select? How do you find out the exercise suited for that particular purpose? So actually, this selection
largely it is from the bank of exercises and games that are existing, sort of whether it is Grotowski or Stanislavski or, sort of the Forum Theatre, all these, Augusto Boal, all these exercises come into play. But what happens is that there, because you know the content and you know what is not happening which you want to happen, then you have to kind of invent an exercise there and then to probably sometimes help. Like things that I work a lot with is giving these small actions and repetitive actions, or telling them that do something which this character will never do. Once we've got into situations, then to break away from stereotypes, to break away from what is the very easy solution to a problem. You give them an exercise on displacement and they'll come with a very cry baby stories. But you tell them that no, it's not all about crying. It's about actually having the emptiness in your stomach about what's happened. I mean, there's very well-known actress acting in Aur Kitne Tukde would love to break into tears and start crying. And I said, no, you can't cry. I will not allow you to cry on stage. Because the moment you do that, you make the emotion that much smaller. Leave it to the audience imagination. You create the true moment. You feel the thing, and for that you have to make them constantly keep getting them to do the opposite. And in the opposite you find the answers. In the opposite you find what action. But these games and exercises definitely comes from a whole bank of, Chekhov, Michael Chekhov exercises, Boal exercises, Grotowski exercises. So you draw upon them most of the time. And sometimes, when it strikes you, then you do something on the spot. But since we know the general basic purpose of what each exercise is meant for, it's not very difficult. But sometimes you do get stuck. I must say that it takes time, or you have to ask a friend that what should I do? It's got stuck here, and they're not able to move forward. They're not able to make a breakthrough. So how does one handle it? And so we discuss and find a solution. All that also happens. But it needs a lot of preparation and work to actually devise and the actor to feel that there is a new challenge every day, that he or she is constantly exploring, that he or she is constantly developing or reaching something. That sense has to be there in the actor, otherwise they will get more panicky.
So I think with this we can say thank you, Kirti ji, a lot because she has been explaining her process of making the theatre and her own changes, the shifts throughout her career to come to that later devising process, etc. And thank you all for being with us, and it has been a very informative session. So many responses are coming in the chat. This will be there in the Facebook page of Lokadharmi. We can revisit it again. So thank you immensely for coming in and sharing this. And also, after I think 2 years we have met last, and it's nice to see you again. And
thank you so much. It was lovely to talk to all these people and to meet so many old friends. Thank you.
Chandradasanji, can I take a moment to personally thank Kirti Di? This is Ramanjeet here. And Kirti Di, I've been listening to you at various seminars, since my childhood, and it's always inspired me because you started devising, you started the devised work very, very early on, many years ago, and it was always very interesting because my journey in the creative arts since 2002 has been devised work. And I'm so happy, Chandradasanji, that I made it to the webinar today, because once again you raised some very important questions, and so beautifully you described how to face all the challenges and come, use them for our creative benefit. And lastly, I would say personal thanks for saying that, yes, we need to look at content and the manifestation in a fresh manner. So big thanks. That's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Ramanjeet, but you have had this wonderful training with Neelam. So,
yes,
I have, my work starts much after that. But I have learned a lot from all these people who have done much more work than I have. So,
but Kirti, it's also, personally what an artist is going through, and then you're affected by the environment, the artistic environment. So that's where the influences also come in. So that's where my thanks to you for always influencing. And today was very, very significant webinar. And I thank Lokadharmi and Chandraji to organize this.
Thank you.
So thank you. Next Sunday, it's at 1:30 p.m. We'll be talking on managing theatre. It's another aspect of doing theatre. Balwant Thakur, the artistic director of Natarang Jammu, who is a director by himself, has done a lot of productions, performed all over India, and a number of productions with adults and children. A lot of work with traditional theatre of Jammu, like Banpata, and also has been in management of theatre in different positions in ICCR, in Secretary of Jammu Cultural Department, and now heading the Cultural Department of India in the South African Embassy. So he'll be speaking about managing theatre in a larger perspective. So it's at 1:30 because he's living in Johannesburg. So next Sunday, 1:30, please be here, everybody. And the next Sunday, 4th October, Ramanjit Kaur will be speaking about her experience. We'll fix the topic a little later. So thank you all for coming in. See you next week, 1:30, not 11. So just keep the change in time.
Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you. And
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Shobha madam, you can end the session. Shobha madam, can you hear me?